Hello, everyone, and welcome to another amazing talk. I know that I say I'm excited for all of these talks, but it's true. I am here today with Yan Grinshtein, and just talking to him in the past few minutes, I know we're in for a very interesting half hour. So Jan is here today. He's actually here from ADP List. And I know we had a couple of talks yesterday from mentors from that organization. If you're here yesterday, you know that you can go on there and book calls with mentors and continue your design journey that way. And I'll drop the link in the chat in case that you'd like to connect with Jan. But Jan in the next half hour is just going to be talking about his journey. He's currently head of design at Hyper and tuning in from Brooklyn, New York. So that's pretty exciting. But I'm going to stop talking because you guys aren't here for me. So yeah, Jan, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you for the intro. And thank you for the invitation. It was, it was really exciting for me to come and talk to everyone today. I was asked to, I guess, give you all a story about my journey. So I'll start with the fact that I've been in the industry for over 20 years, slightly over 2 decades. I worked internationally at 3 different continents, 4 different countries. I worked with hundreds of companies. I started my career at the agency and then shifted to client side. So where did all of this really begin? So let's start with I guess all the way back to when I was a kid. I started drawing when I was 5 years old, and FYI, I was born in Soviet Union. The country doesn't exist anymore. And then when I was 10, we moved to Israel. And then in Israel, when I was around 13, 14, I was accepted into private art school. And so I went for fine arts. And that's where my career actually started. When I was 15 years old, in my high school, luckily, we had part of the high school in Israel. Some of the high schools, they actually have like a technical college attached to them. And so when you're around 15, 16, you have a choice. Either you continue doing your, full graduation of high school and then apply for universities and whatnot. Or you can say, you know what, screw that. I'm not interested. I'm going to go for a profession. And that's where you can actually pivot. And so that's exactly what I did because I hated high school. I really did. I was one of those kids that I'm from a beach town. And so I would go past my high school, go to the beach with my buddies most of the time. And so when I was faced with the choice, do I continue with high school or do I not do my GPA and I go for a profession? I said, well, what the professions are there? And one of them was graphic design. And so I said, I'm perfect. That's exactly what I'm going to do. Screw high school. I'm not interested in that. I'm going to pivot into this thing. And mind you, I don't look old. I'm not that old. But when I was doing my graphic design degree at that college, we didn't have computers. And so everything was done by hand, cutting, lettering, painting, literally drafting the menus for bars and so forth. And so when I was 18 years old, I essentially graduated with an associate's degree in graphic design and a diploma as an art teacher from a fine art school. And yes, I was one of those geeks that went to 2 schools at the same time. And then since I was an Israeli, I'm still an Israeli, but since I was living in Israel, military service is a mandatory thing. So I had to do that for a couple of years. I did that for 2 years. While I was doing that, actually, I was on the weekends playing around with interior design. Some of my buddies who graduated high school at the same time as I did, they started opening up bars, restaurants, coffee shops, and so forth. And so I was the creative guy they knew. And so they would reach out to me and, hey, can you design a bar for me? Can you design a space for me? Can you design what color so my logo is supposed to be or whatever else? And I kind of fell in love with that, even though at the same time, I was still painting. I was officially recognized as a surrealist painter by the art committee of my city when I was 17. I had a few exhibitions when I was a kid, but I was kind of torn between two places, right? It's the fine arts and the interior design. And when I was in the military, my parents picked up and decided to move to Canada in 1999. Wow, that was a while ago.
That was before I was born.
Oh wow, wow. Yeah, time flies. Jesus, time flies. Anyway, so once I was done with the military, I decided, okay, I'm gonna pick up and go to Canada because my parents are there. And so I went to Canada, and probably for the first half a year, I walked around different galleries in Toronto and presenting my artwork and asking them, would you exhibit me and work with me, represent me, and so forth. And I don't know if it was the time period or Toronto wasn't ready for something more abstract and surrealist type. I did have a few galleries tell me that, well, we can't represent you. This stuff, dude, New York, not Toronto, New York. And what do I know? I was 20 years old. I was a kid. And so I tried to figure out what to do with my life. I worked for, some random jobs for the first couple of years. And then I entered a college for interior design architecture. And I loved it. I really did. After my first year, or within my first year, I became a member of the Association of Registered Interior Designers of Ontario. And what it meant at the time is essentially once you graduate, you have a job. You're set, right? You're done. You don't have to look for anything. They will set you up. Now, that was literally beginning of the commercialized internet, right? It was 2002, 2003. That's when, websites and e-commerce, that's where around, I think, eBay was born. And then some of my buddies started kind of sharing. I don't know, probably people here on the call would not be familiar with MIRC chat rooms. It's something way back. They were sharing, look at my website. And so I started looking at these websites. I'm like, hold on a second. How do you do that? And they're like, well, you download that software called Photoshop, and then you use some language called HTML, and you can code this thing. And I got really curious about it. And I'm a very curious individual by nature. So I downloaded a whole lot of documentation that I could find on the internet at the time on HTML and CSS. And then downloaded Photoshop 3.1, I think it was. Yeah, I think it was 3.1. Tinkered around with that, played with it. And as I think one of my first talks when somebody asked me about how did it happen to me, I answered, it was love at first pixel. Like literally, I fell in love with Photoshop. I fell in love with pushing these pixels around and putting things together. And when I finished my first year of college, I had a choice to make. Right? Do I go to some weird temporary job so I can make some money to pay for my next year, or what should I do? And as I was doing already some business cards and invitations and so forth for some family and friends, I figured, you know what, maybe I should try that. And so I convinced one of my friends, who's an engineer actually, to join forces with me. And I said, listen, I'm going to design websites. You're going to code them because I'm not an engineer. I understand some code, but I need somebody who actually developed that. He said, sure, let's do that. I was 23. He was 21, I think. And so I decided to take a sabbatical from college for a year to try and make it into an actual business and then pay for my next year of my college. FYI, I'm still on sabbatical. So I never actually went back to college. The first year was extremely successful for us. We kind of blew up, and that's how I started with my own agency in 2003, and then working with local clients, and then some more broader clients from around Ontario. In 2005, we received the first web award, which I don't know if the organization even exists today. Back in the day, there was an organization was giving web awards, Canadian web awards. And so we received our first award. And from that point on, I became a bit of like a hot commodity, if you will, and different companies started reaching out and asking us, okay, can you guys work with us? Or if you young can come on board for half a year contract and build a design team within the company, or build us a web presence and then let us or teach us how to run it, and then you can go. And so I was in this weird kind of spot of I have my own agency, I have a partner, I did have a few employees at the time. Mind you, they were on a contractor basis, but still. And all these companies now are asking me to come on board and work with them. I was a cocky guy at the time. Like the beginning of the internet, it was a wild, wild west. Nobody really knew what they're doing. Everyone was like, "Well, I have a lot of clients. That means I'm the hot thing right now." And so yeah, that's how I started traveling. I started accepting some of these contracts, and the first one, surprisingly, I'm originally from Israel, as I was telling Rachel backstage. And so the first company took me back to Israel because it was a Florida-based e-commerce, and they had their R&D office in Israel. And so I flew back to Israel for 3 months. In those 3 months, I built out their entire infrastructure and entire e-commerce system. And from that point, I got another contract in Chicago for a real estate company development company. And so I flew there. And then from that point, I went back to Israel. And then I was invited by a startup in Oceanside, New York. And so I came to New York. And so up until I would say 2006-07, I was kind of living out of my suitcase back and forth between the United States and Israel mostly. And then agencies started reaching out to me because I was running my own agency at the same time, and we were kind of successful, gaining awards and so forth. And so I started getting invitations from agencies. And at the age of 27, I think I was among some of my peers, I was the first one at this age to become an art director. And I took a job at an Israeli internet agency in 2006-07. And that's where I really got exposed to the massive conglomerates like Volkswagen, Microsoft, BlackBerry, Ram from Canada. Yeah. And I became kind of so I was one of those people that when you have too much fame, if you will, you become too cocky, and it's really horrible. But when you're a kid, you don't really know better. And so I was one of those guys. So like, my way or the highway. You don't like my way, then get out. I used to fire clients from agencies. They didn't like that. But you live, you learn. I made my share of mistakes, and I've learned from them back in the day. But yeah, I at the age of 27, I was an art director at an agency running 15-people team, working with these international conglomerates. And I think that was the time when I started seriously thinking about, do I really want to be in that world? Do I really want to be in an agency? And I think this is where there was like a pivotal moment in my life of, okay, do I continue doing this? Because it was exhausting, really exhausting. I was on the plane a lot of times, traveling too much. I lived out of my suitcase for probably about a decade. And so I think it was 2008 when the recession hit in the United States. And I was in New York at the time when all of this happened, and my agency started losing clients like flies, really, because that was the first thing that companies did. They immediately got at all of their marketing and advertising budgets. And so in 2009, I made a solid decision to, okay, I'm going to stop traveling. I'm moving back to Israel. I'm done with this world. I sold my agency to a competitor in Israel at the time, and on the sale deal, I had to stay on as an art director for a few years. And so I continue being an art director in that agency. I've joined one for another few years, but that was the time when I said, you know what, I'm going to dictate my terms here, because I'm so tired of the industry. And the terms were that I don't go to the office. That was the first time that I worked from home for a couple of years as an art director, and I said, I'm going to come into the office only if there is a high-stake client that really demands to see me and then talk to me. Otherwise, no. During that time, as I mentioned, I'm an extremely curious individual. During that time, I was living in a house. I had my own little yard. I was living like 15 minutes walk from the beach. I picked up photography just for my own sake, to do something that has nothing to do with design. And I did not plan on it. It kind of blew up and became a thing in Israel. And so in 2010, when I was done with my agreement of being kind of an art director in an agency, I left the design world completely. Like I said, goodbye, don't need it anymore. I'm done. That's it. I worked as a photojournalist for a few years. And about 6 years ago, there's another pivotal moment in my life. Something happened. I'm not going to get into too much detail of what happened. But I got an opportunity to move back to New York. And I did some thinking with myself and made a decision to move back to New York and went back to design. But this time I made a decision that if I'm going back into the industry, I want to work only for industries or projects or products that I have never worked on before. And mind you guys, that's very hard when you're coming from an agency life. Because in agency life, you worked on anything and everything. You're exposed to hundreds of industries and hundreds of companies throughout even a few years of a span of your career in an agency. And so it was really difficult to find something that I've never worked on before, right? And I've never been exposed to. But I really wanted to challenge myself because I was so tired of status quo and regular BS of agencies. And so my first job when I came back to New York, and mind you, I'm coming with decades of experience, awards, and talks around the world and so forth. The first job that I took was probably the lowest paying one with the lowest offer. And I'm going to expose the numbers here. The offer was $60,000 a year. For somebody with experience with over, what was it, I think 17, 18 years at a time, this is like a slap in your face. Like literally, that's a slap in your face. But what the offer had is a very scrappy startup in the 3D printing industry. And I have never been exposed to that industry. I didn't even know it existed up until that point, right? And so for me, it was exciting. And so I accepted the offer. I walked in. I had zero team. I was the only designer in the company. I was responsible essentially for everything: the branding, the website, the e-commerce, the entire interaction, building out the ecosystem of communication between the printer and the internet, the cloud computing. And I like to know in depth of what I'm working on typically. And so what I did on my second day in the company, I went to the production line and I picked up a printer and I literally disassembled the printer by myself to pieces and reassembled it back so I can have a deeper understanding of what I'm going to be representing and what I'm going to be actually designing for. Unfortunately, the startup tanked. About 10 months later, the founder and CEO came out, took me out for a walk, said, "Listen, Yan, I love you, but I just can't pay you anymore. We're done." Yeah, it was an interesting moment. But then once again, I was faced with, okay, what do I do now, right? Agency life typically was pretty simple. You apply for a different agency, you just move there and you keep on going. But once again, I was, okay, so what do I do now? I do need a job, but I don't want to go work for just any company. And I did get offers from banks and insurance companies and so forth. And so then came along an interesting offer from a special education technology company. And that's where I got exposed on something that I've never worked on. Mind you, I did work with governments before. I did work on government companies and government entities. I worked with Ministry of Tourism in Israel and some natural gas lines company, which is owned by the Israeli government. And that was a challenge. That was the first time that I got exposed to what the United States education system is like, the issues it has, and there's a lot. But it gave me this it gave me this a feeling of immense responsibility, because the product that I was working on was essentially designed for special education teachers. And I don't know if you guys know how this works in the United States, and especially in New York, is that if there is a child with special needs for school, that the child goes through evaluation in their early stages of their education system. And evaluation is being done by special ed teachers like speech pathologists, math teachers, behavioral psychologists, and so forth. And they're filling out this document called IEP document in New York State. And it's the same in Connecticut and New Jersey. And so while they're filling out this document, it's a massive, it's like a book type of a document with a lot of details. Because as long as the document is really full and includes all the details, that means that the school that will be educating the child and taking care of the child can receive funds from the government to take care of that child. Because if they do not, they cannot take care of the child, and that means they cannot accept the child into that school. So essentially, if the document is executed incorrectly, the child does not receive a proper care in that school system. So it's literally a responsibility on your shoulder as a creative, right, to build a proper system that when teachers and special education professionals filling up, they will not make a mistake. They will not miss something. Because if they do, that means it's the child's life on the line there. And it was extremely rewarding working with school districts and working with teachers and understanding the complexities of the education system and government regulations and school district regulations, and also making sure that whatever is being done is done for the child and not necessarily for the businesses and school districts and so forth. And so it kind of leads me to where I am these days. And these days, I'm a head of design at Hyper, as Rachel mentioned. Hyper is a cybersecurity company. It's yet another industry I've never worked in before. But the biggest challenge, I guess, that I found in that company, and then why I joined, even though the founders were convincing me to join because I didn't want to at the beginning. When they showed me what they're doing 4 years ago, I'm like, this is an API-driven product. Why do you need a designer? You just give this API to a client, charge them money, and deploy it. That's it. But no, they spend several meetings convincing me that I need to join. And 4 years later, we have our own products, and we're one of the leaders in the industry. And what we do is we eliminate passwords, and that's, from my perspective, it's a fundamentally a behavioral change of the entire human race, if you will, because for the past 57 years we typing passwords, right? Everyone does. It's ingrained in our brains by now, and so I kind of felt that being a part of this company is I'm fundamentally changing the human condition as we know it in terms of that password behavior. So yeah, but along the way, in order to achieve all of these things and jump between all these companies and so forth, there are a few things that I've learned, and a lot of mentors when I speak to, they're asking these questions. How did you get here? And how did you become head of design? How did you do all of that? And then so forth. There's no like a linear path. There's no, like a formula. If you follow specific steps, and you'll achieve certain success in your career. It's, as people show you or tell you or might tell you that, oh, if you do this, then you'll get that. If you have this, you'll get that, and so on and so forth. No, it's a mess. It's a mess of a path, and you stumble along the way, and you make mistakes, and you learn from them. But what I think was going for me really in my career is the fact that, one, I never really limit myself geographically. I've noticed a lot of people, when they look for a job, they look for a job locally, either in their city or their state. And so no, I'm a creative or a designer or whatever really else, especially these days. Why should I be limited by my city or my state or even my country? Like literally, I moved countries 3 or 4 times throughout my career, right? And allowing myself to be absolutely open to this global environment from the early stages of my career, it gave me an immense amount of opportunities, because sometimes you might find something incredibly interesting to work on, and it might come from, I don't know, some rural Arkansas, right? Somewhere in deep south of the United States that people typically make fun of and think that apart from farming, there's nothing else there, right? So yeah, I never limited myself by geolocation, and I never limited myself by industry or specific company or specific worldly view of that company. Because some companies you might not agree with the way they behave on a global scale or on a national scale as a company, but deep inside, right, in the weeds of actual employees or actual departments, there might be extremely ethical and really good people and great teams to work on and work with, right? And this is where you learn. And if you really do want to make an impact among all these companies like Facebooks and so forth that people are typically demonizing and whatnot, is make a change. Get hired, make a change from inside, right? Don't just walk around and talk about them. So, over 20 years later, numerous awards and publications, both in photography and design. I've been speaking internationally to different organizations and then schools alike. And I mentioned to Rachel that my first talk, actually, when I was 26 years old, I gave at St. Brock's University. And the subject of that talk was color in space. And I gave that talk to the Ontario Association of Librarians. I was talking about and teaching them how to utilize color in libraries to increase traffic flow and make people feel more at ease being in that space. Because when I was an interior design student, one of the subjects that I did learn and still apply throughout my entire career is color in human psychology. And I think we got 4 minutes left. If you guys have questions, I'll be happy to answer. If you don't, you can always reach out to me on ADP list and connect with me, book a time with me, and I'll always talk to you.
Yeah, so I have lots of questions. I
Go
think
for it.
that was a really, really beautiful journey, honestly. And I really connect to you on the whole fact of, we go out and we search for basically this guidebook of, how can I do this? How can I go about my career and my journey and do meaningful work? And people always want to, offer this like nice little box of, well, this is how I did it. So, and it worked for me. So hopefully, that will work for you. And that doesn't always, actually results in what you want. But I think that approach of going to different countries and learning, not limiting yourself is a really good idea. But I was really interested in how that sort of affected your outlook on design and how those countries maybe had different approaches or cultural attitudes towards design, and if you could speak on that.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely shaped me as a creative. It definitely shaped my point of view on several things. Among those is really hiring as a creative leader. When you're in a company and you're a manager and you're hiring people, right? What I've learned is talent can come from many different places. And this is, I think, one of the things that made me stand out as a leader years ago. Today, the entire industry is shifting. Over the past 3, 4, 5 years, I see a fundamental shift in hiring approach. But back in the day, I was one of those to say, I don't care where the person went to school. I don't care where they worked before. I don't care if they know how to use a specific tool. I care if they're human. I care if they're, as I mentioned, as I said in one of my posts on LinkedIn some time ago, I can teach people how to use tools. I cannot teach people how to be talented. I cannot teach people how to be empathetic. I cannot teach people to be respectful of other people. Like, these are the things I can't teach. I can teach everything else. I can teach how to use Sketch or InVision or Photoshop or any of these tools. But to be human and to be an individual, that's one of those things that make us unique. And I think that's one of the biggest things that shaped me as a creative, traveling through all these countries and being exposed to different cultures. And of course, you gain the knowledge of how to design for different cultures and how to design for multiple languages, right? Because I do speak 3 languages, and I do speak 2 languages that you write left to right or right to left, right? And so it definitely helps you to have this knowledge when you were designing things. So yeah, it did have an impact.
Wow. And I also going off this, because I feel like you're constantly, learning and trying to discover these new spaces, really. I'm wondering, what are you learning about right now, or what's something that you're curious to learn more about?
Oh, wow. That's a big
loaded
question,
maybe.
Yeah. So my curiosity is to my own fault sometimes. It really sometimes bad, if you will. So right now I am learning. So just on a learning path, right? As I mentioned, I love photography. And so right now I'm learning how to photograph well food. Why? Because my partner, she's a baker. And so I'm helping her out to create her own brand and then start selling, because her baking is very unique. That is, it's a vegan and gluten-free. So it's like really its own path. And so that's one of the things that I'm learning right now. Another thing that I'm learning is, I would say it's not right now. It's been going on for the past several years. So a few years back, I got into a much deeper state of understanding the human behavior on a much deeper level, and how do we interact with the next generation of artificial intelligence. And so that curiosity kind of took me on the path of completing a course at MIT for HCI that was specifically designed for UXers who've been in the industry for X amount of years. For what we learned is how human beings could be interacting with machines on a natural linguistics basics, right? How do we? So my paper that I wrote for my course completion was basically designing a flow of or a theory of how the human being is supposed to be or should be interacting with the artificial intelligence and robotics, essentially, in such a way that it doesn't sound like you're interacting with the machine. Because right now, what we do as humans, when we be trained by Googles and Amazons and so forth with all these assistants to kind of evoke them and then talk to them like they are a machine, like, Alexa, do this. Hey, Siri, do that, right? It's not something that we do when we talk to each other, right? I don't say, hey, Rachel, do this, or hey, Rachel, can you do that, right? We just talk, right? And so that's one of the things that I think machines are really missing these days. And so I always try to understand, how can we utilize our natural abilities to communicate and apply it to an actual digital product, and see how we can streamline that work process, where human being might not even necessarily need to actually poke into that digital product, but just communicate with it.
Right. That's really cool, I think. And I have one more question before we close things off. And this is a little bit of a random question, but it's because I've been, I guess I read this book probably about a month ago, and it was all about the morning routines of different people. And I think that this, it really sets you up well for doing what you want to be doing and having a good day. So I was just wondering, what is your morning routine?
You asked the right person and the wrong person. I'll tell you why. I'm a creature of habit.
Yeah.
And the reason why I like my habits is because it frees up my mental capacity to concentrate on other things that I don't have to think about.
Yeah.
My morning routine. So I typically wake up around 6 a.m. in the morning. Sometimes I might sleep into 6.
We all do.
But typically it's 6 a.m. in the morning. And the first, probably, I would say, half an hour of that morning, I'll just spend in complete silence in the living room on the couch, in complete darkness, no lights, no nothing, just going through my emails from last night, going through all the like Jira tickets and tasks, Slack messages, and so forth, all the communication that might have came in from last night, because I turn off my notifications and my phone at 10 p.m. Like I'm off. And for the first half an hour, just go through all of that. If there's anything that needs an immediate address, I'll reply. I'll send some message. I'll answer some questions to my teammates, some of my colleagues in the company, or some mentees or other mentors that I talk to. And then around, I would say 6:45 ish, I'll wash my face, brush my teeth, and then start breakfast. During breakfast, typically I do have 3 Alexas in the house. My Alexa in the kitchen will read my newscast in the morning, so I would listen to some news, and it would involve some tech news, it will involve some politics, it will involve some local news, and some general, and some news from Israel. While I'm making breakfast, then as soon as I have breakfast, and just FYI, I eat the same thing every single morning, which is oatmeal with some nuts and seeds, and then some berries. Then I will go and I would sit down in front of a TV for the next about 15 to 20 minutes, and I'll watch some local news and some other YouTube videos from something funny. I don't know, Stephen Colbert, Trevor Noah, just to light up my mood a little bit, because typically when you listen to news while you're making breakfast, some news might be not so great. And then around, I would say 7:30-ish, 8, that's when I would typically sit down from my computer right now. Before COVID-19, I'm a cyclist, so I'll get on my bike and I'll bike to work. And my commute to work typically was about an hour and a half. It's 12 miles each way. So I'll get on my bike and I'll be at the office around like 9:30-ish, and that's when my meeting starts, and that's how my day starts.
Wow. Thank you. I find it really interesting because everyone, has something different, but it works for them. And I find that for me is so important, and, being in the right mind space really for the day. So
yeah,
I know we've gone over, pardon?
Morning is important.
Yes, exactly. So I know we've gone over time a little bit, but thank you so much for.
Sure, it was my pleasure, absolute pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, absolutely. And again, if you're interested in contacting Yan, then you can click the link that I've put in the chat. And thank you so much, everyone. Good luck with your submissions. I am really excited to see them all, and then have our closing ceremonies this evening.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. Have a great